to our Constitution read aloud. We're so glad to have you here. If you need Zoom help, please, using the chat, send a message to all panelists, and one of our chat moderators will respond. For all other comments and questions, be sure to use the all attendees and panelist selection on the chat. We do expect participants to engage in a respectful manner in the chat box, and we'll turn off the chat feature or disable it for participants if necessary. In terms of the chat, please be sure that your Zoom settings are set so that you can see the speaker. If you'd like to, you can turn off or on the closed captioning by looking for that CC option at either the top or bottom of your screen. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Paul Constantine, Associate Dean of the University Libraries, who will introduce our new libraries Vice Provost and Dean. Paul.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this program of the University of Washington Libraries. I'm Paul Constantine, and I serve as Associate Dean of University Libraries for Distinctive Collections. As we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge and reflect on the lands on which we reside. Our University of Washington community is spread around the globe. We would like to take time to acknowledge all of the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Puyallup, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Welcome to our 16th annual reading of the Constitution. Taking a quick look at this year's readers, I'm pretty sure that at least a few of you have participated every year. Thank you. We couldn't do this without you. Today, we gather to read one of the founding documents of the United States, the Constitution, which was written in Philadelphia over the course of 5 months in 1787. The Constitution was written and signed on the homelands of the Lenape people, the indigenous people forced from their homelands under threat of violence in the 18th century as a result of European colonization. If you don't know the ancestral lands on which you reside, you can search your current location on the Canadian website native-land.ca to learn more. Acknowledging the ceded and unceded land on which we all stand could not be more important at our current historical moment, and for those of us participating in this event today. Please use the chat feature to share greetings from your own location. Be sure to chat with all attendees and panelists. Joining us today for his first experience of our annual reading is Simon Neame, our new Dean of University Libraries. Simon joined us last month from the University of Massachusetts. And while Simon may have come from UMass, he is a true Pacific Northwesterner, having attended the University of Victoria and spent much of his career at UBC. Welcome, Simon.
I mute myself. Great. Thank you so much, Paul. It's a real honor to be here, both at the University of Washington, in the libraries, and participating in this event. I'm very excited. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our annual UW Libraries Constitution Read Aloud. 131 years ago, Congress designated the University of Washington Libraries as a special place to collect, preserve, and provide access to official documents, a federal depository library. We have collected over 1.5 million documents, and our collections are still growing. Our librarians now assist users with resources on the .gov and the .mil internet domains, resources now numbering in the hundreds of millions of distinct URLs. Since 2006, the UW community members have read this living document from start to finish. We prefer to hold our reading when classes are in session. It is our delayed celebration of Constitution Day and Citizenship Day, normally observed on September 17th. The Constitution can change, and it has changed. It changes when enough people in enough states agree that it is time for a change. For example, it took over 200 years to ratify the 27th Amendment concerning congressional salaries. As we read, we connect with themes of equity, diversity, and inclusion related to parts of the Constitution. Law librarian Maya Swanes has prepared a bibliography of recent texts on these questions. The bibliography is linked from the library's Constitution Read Aloud page and will be shared in the chat as well. We produced this reading over the past month as over 90 participants video recorded themselves. Students, faculty, staff, librarians, alumni, retirees, families, friends, and community members, sometimes with their small pets or small children helping. In fact, the very last recording is a little hard to hear as the reader's toddler began beating a metal drum right in the middle of it. We decided not to edit out the sound of the drum, knowing that future changes to the Constitution will come only from those who make noise. What do you hear in the Constitution? Do you remember when you first read or heard it, and what stands out now? As we turn now to an informal conversation with our guest panelists, Michael Mungin, Dr. Cricket Keating, Misty Shock-Rule, and Callum Bryant, who will reflect on these questions. Then we will play the woven together video of everyone's readings. I will now turn this over to Michael, a research and instruction librarian from our Bothell Campus Library.
Thank you, Dean Neem, and welcome to all who are tuning in now or viewing this as a recording. We are very, very glad that you're here. Many people have contributed to making this event possible. The UW Library's Constitution Read Aloud planning team, 90 distinct readers, and our 3 panelists. In a few minutes, we will air the 2021 recording, and there's a lot packed into this document, of course. History and current events become illuminated as we read. Some aspects of the history and current events inspire us, whereas others create an instant association in our minds with systems of inequalities that we are still striving to overcome. If we're being honest, long stretches of the Constitution can be stultifying to read, right down to the archaic language and the structure of the document. Even if you read the words aloud, you may not fully understand the context of, for example, prohibition or presidential succession as well as you'd like to. The idea behind this reading is to help us all become more familiar with the text. We're looking to have a fairly simple conversation today, even though we're not Constitution experts. The 4 of us on this panel, though more of a facilitator, are meeting each other for the first time. Our conversation could go as long as 20 minutes, but it may be shorter. Although you can't participate directly in our conversation, you can add comments or questions in the chat. If our conversation slows down, we will ask one of our organizers, maybe Amanda or Carolyn, to read from the chat. And without further ado, I will briefly introduce the members of today's panel, starting with myself, the facilitator. So I'm Michael Mungin. As you heard, I'm a research and instruction librarian at the University of Washington Bothell campus, as well as Cascadia College. I'm the designated librarian for sociology, psychology, and community psychology. I also have a deep interest in how libraries use and promote film. In fact, my work creating a database of films featuring queer and trans people of color was recently highlighted in UW magazine. I didn't write that, but thank you to whoever did. Next, we welcome Calum Bryant. a graduating senior in political science who has worked in the UW Library since 2019. He co-curated the exhibit of political cartoons currently on display in the ground floor of Suzzallo Library, entitled Pen and Ink Politics, Polarization and the Pandemic. I will have to check that out. Next, we have Cricket Keating, an associate professor in the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies Department. Her research is in the areas of political theory, decolonial politics, popular education and critical pedagogy, queer politics, transnational feminist theory, and technofeminism. Welcome, Professor Keating. Finally, we are joined by Misty Shock-Rule, who worked in the Government Publications Department of UW Libraries while a student and graduated in 1999 with a degree in English. She went on to work in tech and politics before coming back to the UW in 2015. She now writes as part of the UW News Department and on her U District food blog, Eating the Av, which you all should go check out after this event is over. So welcome our panelists. I'll start with a very broad question for you all, and you can all decide which order you'd like to talk in. But broadly, what is one thing that stands out to you about the Constitution, and has that changed over your lifetime? I read Callum first, and he can go first if he wants, or anyone can go first.
I can go first. Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. First of all, full disclosure, when we're talking about changes over my lifetime, I have a much shorter one than the rest of the panelists here. And so it can be a little bit difficult to talk about things in those contexts. But I think in light of recent current events, there are several things that stick out about the Constitution. The particular clause that I picked out to talk about today is put into stark contrast with the recent pullout from Afghanistan. And so I wanted to bring up Article 1, Section 12, Clause 8 of the Constitution, which is also known as the Armies Clause. And it gives Congress the power to raise and support armies, but specifies that no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. And so it was designed originally to check the power of the executive branch by making sure that they couldn't put the country into like foreign military ventures in the long term, and that they couldn't use the military to like suppress domestic operations and things. But I was born just before the war in Afghanistan started, and I'm just about to graduate college right after Afghanistan ends, and it's been 20 years. So it's very interesting to think about how priorities have changed in that time for Congress and for the government in general, in that it seems like they're willing to cede more power to the executive branch than they may have been 200 years ago. Because obviously they've signed off on military budgets, and the military industrial complex has a lot of influence on American politics. And so I just think it's really interesting to view those changes over time.
Thank you so much for that. I see both Cricket and Misty look like they're reaching for the mute button. Either one can go first.
Go ahead, Misty.
I was racing you. Thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to be part of this panel today. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, I think of the Constitution as the ultimate statement of our principles and values. And I have to admit that for much of my life, I didn't think that much about the Constitution. I was adopted from Korea as a baby, and I grew up thinking about myself as like the community I grew up in. But as I got older, I really thought more about my identity and my Korean American identity, my American identity, and the tension between those two things. And as someone not born here, I really started to realize that American democracy isn't something that I can take for granted. And so I really see the Constitution as a gift. It's a flawed gift. And I think our efforts to correct those flaws, overcome those flaws, and really live true to our principles is our struggle as a country.
Let me jump in. Oh, it's so nice to be here and to be in conversation with both of you, all three of you. And it's just such a wonderful event to start the year off with each year. Every year, it makes me reread the Constitution, and every year I see something new in it, depending on what's happening in the world, what's happening in my life. But that question, what's one thing that stands out to you and what's one thing that changed over your lifetime, was particularly is a nice way to think about it, in that it straddles both, like what's in the document and then reflecting our own lives, as Misty and Calum have done, reflecting upon the Constitution in our own lives. So I think for me, as a political theorist, what stands out about it is that it's a instantiation of a social contract, or so in liberal democratic theory, sort of the legitimating, the way that political rule is legitimated is that notion that people can come together and choose their own rules, choose their own terms and conditions of rule. So for me, and I think Paul's very much grounding on us in the like settler colonial history of this document, for me, what stands out about it is that it establishes the terms and conditions of masculinist, so patriarchal and white supremacist and settler colonial rule in the late 1700s, and then has served to legitimate it for almost 250 years. So that's, when I think about that, it has a document, I think that's what it is and does. And then when I think about my particular lifetime, well, I think I'm a little older than the two of you, so I have to think way back. But I think, the last time, the document itself, I mean, there's been several extremely important civil rights amendments to the Constitution, but the last one in my lifetime was in '71, when there was an amendment that reduced the voting age to 18 from 21 after the Vietnam era protests. And since then, so in the last 50 years, so my time, there's been, of course, legislative advancements and interpretive advancements, but the document itself has the civil rights advancements have sort of languished. Either the ERA, though recently Virginia just passed it, so maybe it will get to be an official amendment, or the voting rights bill for DC also languished, but now we have an opening for that legislatively. So it's been a difficult time in terms of the document itself, a conservative and sometimes regressive time for the document itself in my lifetime. Like, not many civil rights amendments to the document. Sorry, going on and on. Sorry, Michael, for taking too much time.
Oh, no, you're good. This is already so interesting because everyone is bringing their lens from their generation, from their lived experience in cultures and different perspectives. Like, there's so much to unpack in this document. I was going to skip this question, but I love it so much. I like ranking things. What are some of your favorite articles and amendments and least favorite? Callum, I know you mentioned the Army's clause. So I'll throw it back to you. Do you have any other favorite or least favorite articles, and why?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the big ones, the Bill of Rights, I'm a big fan of pretty much in its entirety. Specifically, the First Amendment's guarantees of free speech and freedom of assembly are pretty much the building blocks of democracy. I think it's very dangerous when states move to limit those. And I think the events of the past 2 years have, I think the events of the last 2 years have kind of been interesting because, like, you never want to limit the right to free speech, but then all these different things happen that make you think that maybe there are some situations where, like, limiting free speech might be, like, for the public safety, with the COVID pandemic and in terms of like vaccine mandates and mask mandates, and then the protests that follow and the Capitol insurrection. Like there've just been so many instances of public assemblies that might be against the public safety, but at the same time, they're constitutionally protected. And so I think it's something that as a society will have to grapple with to come to terms with what's the right balance here for our country, and how can we protect people while at the same time guaranteeing them their freedoms. And I think the Fifth Amendment due process rights are also very important for similar reasons. It stops the government from silencing people who disagree with it. And again, it's the same kind of discussion that we're going to have as a society, where can you silence protesters who might be putting people in danger, or like if they're spreading misinformation? And it's a very difficult situation that I don't think has arisen in our country's history until this point. So it's a novel debate, I suppose. And in terms of the lows of constitutional backgrounds, like the Constitution, I think Article 1, Section 2 is the location in the original document of the 3/5 compromise, which is obviously morally unsupportable. I think it's very difficult to reconcile the reputation of the Constitution as a document of freedom and liberty, when at the same time it's clearly not treating all of its citizens equally.
Misty or Cricket, do you have any thoughts along those lines? I know that touches on some of the things you've already said, actually. That's a picture is emerging, it sounds like.
I worked in politics for 10 years, Washington State Democrats, so working to turn out the vote. So my favorites are any that expand access to the right to vote. Least favorite, as well as what Callum mentioned, is the part about how you have to be a natural born citizen to be president, because that means I can't be president. And you know you all want President Misty.
I totally would vote for you, President Misty. Yeah, very much. For me, I think the part I like most, the part that still is moving to me, in spite of everything, is that we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, that possibility of a much more expanded we than we started out with. And then also in order to form a more perfect union, the sense that we always need to keep improving. We always need to keep pushing, and we can come up with a more perfect union. I like the hopefulness embedded in that, and the collectivity embedded in that. Most favorite, least favorite amendment, I think of course, the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery was both maybe my favorite one, but also in it embedded, of course, is the exception where it's with the exception of prisoners, or with the exception of criminals. So that is also my least favorite. And then maybe again, in my lifetime, we've seen the mass incarceration of people of color and the expanse of the prison industrial complex. So, but then also so right now the rise of the prison abolition movement, Black Lives Matter, very much in that line of, in order to form a more perfect union, to address that horrible loophole in that amendment. So I think that was favorite and most favorite in the same one.
If anyone gets a chance, along those lines, there is a great documentary from a couple years ago called 13th, directed by Ava DuVernay. I believe it's up for free on YouTube still. Definitely check that out to see how that 13th Amendment has played out over American history, or since the Civil War. Yeah, so we have about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one last question. Cricket had mentioned a little bit about the context of the creation of the document and the people who were in the room when it was created. And so that kind of, for me, that an interesting question for me is the Constitution, do you feel more about the past, the present, or the future, or some combination? Did I stump the panelists?
Oh, yeah, Misty.
Sorry. I think going off what Cricket was just saying about a more perfect union, I think this document is about the future and the fact that it was written under the context of a lot of racist, sexist impulses, is a lot of isms. And I think our challenge is to have the document live up to the best ideals of our country.
Yeah, I think it's definitely about our past. And I think one of the great things about reading this every year is like keeping that past really present. It of course is present, but very critically present is also, just as you were saying, Michael, all the things that it reminds you of that, oh, I need to learn more about what was the context of that. So very much, so I realized, oh, I forgot all about the quartering stuff. I forgot what that was about, that the British troops used to quarter, have their troops housed in people's houses. And that seems like a very much of a past problem, but of course it could be, with militarization, it could be a present and future problem. So it's good to, even things that seem very anachronistic, good to keep in our present mind. And then it's also, of course, a present document. And again, reading it this year as opposed to other years, all the parts about how to vote, how the electoral college should come together and vote, which before seemed like just the most boring part of the Constitution, this year really popped because of course, the attack on that process. For me, I think it would have to, I can't say that I want it to be for our future. I think it would have to change a lot for it. And I read a lot of different kind of constitutions. And so I see, there's wonderful things that some more contemporary constitutions could have that ours don't have. So I think that hopefully we'll move into a more, if we've been in sort of a stagnant time in terms of our Constitution, hopefully we can move into a more participatory, more open-ended time in terms of making it a document that speaks to different possible futures.
Yeah, I hope that our Constitution can become more for our future than about our past. I think much of its significance for today's world comes from its implications for the present, because it is the supreme law of the land. We can't ignore it. And I don't think we certainly don't want to forget about the past and why these things happen. But it's a living document. It was designed to be a living document, and the founders included the amendment process so that it could be adopted for the needs of future Americans. And so I think the people learning about it today, and everybody watching this falls into that category, people who want to read the Constitution and want to learn about the Constitution and want to make America a better place are the people who can change the Constitution to suit their needs. And so I think that should ultimately be our goal. Like, we should be adapting this historical document to better serve the needs of Americans today, and to ensure that no one who was included in the past is ever excluded again.
Thank you, Michael, for telling us that your Zoom is malfunctioning. I'm Cass Hartnett. I'm the U.S. Documents Librarian, and I am hereby going to thank our wonderful panelists. I think that's we're about at time to wrap up our informal conversation, and I just can't thank the three of you and Michael enough. I thought this came together beautifully. And I'm already thinking of conversations I want to have with each of you, and I'm thinking of more things I want to look up in the library or online. At this time, we're going to move on, and we're actually going to play the recording. So I will ask, I think we've decided that Amanda's internet connection is best, and I'll ask Amanda to share screen, and here we go. Have a great rest of your day.